The courtroom was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that made every cough echo like thunder. Then from the very back of the room, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I'll defend him!" Every head turned at once. Gasps rippled through the gallery. And there she stood, a young black woman, no lawyer's badge, no tailored suit, just a plain apron tied around her waist and sweat glistening on her forehead. She clutched a battered folder to her chest as if it were armor. The judge blinked. The prosecutor smirked. Some laughed outright. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Probably the maid," another sneered. "What's next? The janitor taking the bench?" At the defense table sat Alexander Grant, 47 years old, a self-made millionaire whose name had once graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Today, his fortune and reputation were dangling over the abyss. His high-priced attorney had mysteriously vanished on the very morning of the trial. Rumors whispered he had fled the country. And now in front of the federal court of Manhattan, the only person willing to speak for him was the woman who scrubbed his marble floors. Grant turned slowly toward her, his face hardening in disbelief. "You?" he barked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You should be polishing my silverware, not standing in front of a judge. Sit down before you embarrass us both." Laughter erupted. Phones lifted to record the spectacle. But the woman didn't flinch. She stepped forward, chin high. "I know every page of this case," she said firmly. "Every contract, every signature. And I can prove you were set up." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Miss, are you a licensed attorney?" "No, Your Honor," she replied calmly. "But I know the truth, and sometimes truth doesn't wait for permission." The room went still. For the first time, even the millionaire himself looked shaken, not by fear, but by the impossible question. Could the maid really be his only hope? Before I reveal what happened next, tell me, if you were in that courtroom, would you trust her? If you like this story, please subscribe and comment. If you don't like it, at least hit like. The courtroom was still ringing from her audacious declaration. For a heartbeat, even the ceiling fans seemed to stop. Alexander Grant, the millionaire accused of fraud, leaned back in his chair, staring at the woman as if she were some absurd hallucination. Her name was Maya Ellis, 26 years old. To him, she had been invisible until this very moment. The maid who dusted his chandeliers, folded his shirts, and brought in fresh flowers every Monday morning. Now she was standing in front of a federal judge, daring to take on the role his absent lawyer had abandoned. "Proceed if you must," the judge finally said, tapping his pen with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "But understand, Miss Ellis, this is highly irregular. Mr. Grant must agree to your representation for this preliminary hearing." Alexander scoffed loudly, throwing up his hands. "This is madness. I'm not entrusting my freedom to her." His words cut like a whip. "She cleans bathrooms for a living. What could she possibly know about federal law?" But Maya didn't falter. She stepped closer, her eyes unwavering. "You think this is about who I am," she said softly, "but it's about what I know, and what I know can save you." A hush fell over the room. Even the prosecutor, a woman named Lauren Keene, paused in mid-smirk. She was dressed in flawless navy, the perfect image of corporate poise. For weeks, she had prepared to dismantle Alexander Grant's empire with evidence of forged contracts, offshore transfers, and whispered bribes. The case was supposed to be airtight, yet now this maid, this nobody, was threatening to pry it open. "Your Honor," Maya continued, her voice steady, "I attended Columbia Law. I left in my second year when my father died, and my family fell into debt. Since then, I've worked wherever I could, yes, even scrubbing floors to survive. But I never stopped studying. Every night, every break, every quiet hour, I pored over legal rulings, corporate fraud cases, SEC filings. And this case," she lifted her folder, worn at the edges, brimming with handwritten notes and color-coded tabs. "This case I know better than anyone." Laughter trickled from the gallery again, mocking, dismissive, but thinner this time, less certain. Lauren Keene raised an eyebrow. "With respect, Your Honor, this is insulting. The defense cannot be trusted to the delusions of a failed law student." The judge glanced at Alexander. "It is your choice, Mr. Grant. You can permit her to speak, or we adjourn until counsel appears, which may take days if at all. Alexander's jaw clenched. He hated the spectacle, hated the idea of being represented by a maid, hated even more the thought of appearing weak. Yet beneath the fury was something else. Desperation. He had no lawyer. The prosecution was circling like sharks. And Maya, whether she was brilliant or insane, was the only person in the room willing to stand at his side. Fine, he muttered bitterly. Do your worst. Maya nodded once sharply, as if sealing a pact. She moved to the defense table, placed her battered folder on the polished oak, and opened it. Inside were not grocery lists or idle scribbles, as some had joked, but contracts, digital logs, highlighted paragraphs, and cross-references from cases she had followed for years. Let's begin, she said. And then, like a pianist who had practiced in secret, waiting for her chance at the stage, she played. Maya's voice filled the courtroom, crisp and precise. She cited contract clauses, compared phrasing between filings, and pointed out discrepancies in the supposed evidence against Alexander. She drew attention to an IP address in Zurich that did not match his company's usual digital footprint, to legal phrasing more common in European firms than American ones. With each detail, the gallery leaned forward, surprise replacing derision. Even Alexander, arms folded in stubborn resistance, found himself listening. Every sentence Maya spoke chipped away at his disbelief. Could it be true? Could this woman, whom he had barely acknowledged in his own mansion, actually know enough to dismantle the prosecution's case? At one point, Lauren interrupted, her voice sharp. This is conjecture. She has no license, no authority. Objection noted, the judge interjected, his tone sharper than before. But the evidence she's presenting is tangible. Continue, Miss Ellis. The prosecutor's smirk faltered. By the time Maya concluded her preliminary argument, the room was different. The mocking tone had vanished. The gallery, once amused, now sat in an uneasy silence. The judge rubbed his temple thoughtfully. This is compelling, he admitted. We will recess until tomorrow to examine these claims and determine their validity. Miss Ellis, you may return then, pending review. Maya bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. When the gavel struck, Alexander didn't move immediately. He simply stared at her, his lips pressed tight. For the first time since his empire had begun to crumble, he no longer looked completely alone. Outside the courthouse, the cold March wind bit at Maya's face as she walked down the granite steps. She pulled her cardigan tighter, her folder clutched to her chest. The crowd was buzzing, reporters whispering, spectators pointing, some even filming her departure. Back at her basement apartment in Newark, she spread her documents across the kitchen table, the same table where she once helped her little brother finish math homework while stirring soup for her mother. Tonight, it was her war room. Sticky notes, old case files, printouts from public records, all spread like puzzle pieces waiting to be solved. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. You were something else today, a man's low voice drawled. Didn't expect the maid to turn the room upside down? Maya froze. Who is this? Let's just say someone in that courtroom has more at stake than you realize. Careful, Miss Ellis. You're poking a bear, and sometimes the bear bites back. The call ended. Silence filled the room. Maya sat still, her hand trembling just slightly before she forced it to stillness. She had grown up with fear. She knew its face. But this was different. This was power warning her to back down, and she had no intention of doing so. The voice on the phone still echoed in her ears long after the line had gone dead. Careful, Miss Ellis. You're poking a bear, and sometimes the bear bites back. Maya Ellis set the phone down slowly on the cluttered kitchen table. The fluorescent bulb above flickered once, casting shadows across the contracts and scribbled notes spread before her. She leaned back in her chair, pressing a hand against her chest, forcing her heartbeat to slow. She had grown up with fear, dark alleyways in Newark, overdue eviction notices, menacing landlords who banged on the door at midnight. But this was different. This was calculated, cold. It wasn't the threat of poverty, it was the threat of power. And yet, as fear pressed against her ribs, something sharper pushed back. Resolve. She whispered into the quiet room, then let it bite. Maya arrived at the Grant estate earlier than expected, her modest gray cardigan pulled close against the morning chill. The mansion loomed as it always had, gleaming marble, tall gates, perfectly pruned hedges. To most, it looked untouchable. But Maya had seen the cracks, a lonely millionaire inside, an empire bleeding from within. She found Alexander Grant in his study, hunched over his desk, papers scattered like fallen leaves. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He looked up with irritation when she entered. "I didn't ask for you," he said sharply. "You didn't ask for me yesterday either," Maya replied calmly. "But you needed me." Grant slammed his pen onto the desk. "Do you think yesterday changed anything? A maid playing lawyer? They laughed at me. At us!" Maya didn't flinch. She stepped closer, placed her worn folder on the desk, and opened it deliberately. "I think yesterday cracked a door. If we push, it will open. And that's the only way you survive this." For a long moment, Grant said nothing. He tapped a pen against his desk, staring at her. Finally, he muttered, "Fine. Talk." She leaned forward. "Someone is setting you up. The contract revision. Too clean, too foreign in phrasing. You signed it remotely?" Grant frowned. "Yes, I was in Napa for a wine conference. I signed documents on the go. That's standard practice. Do you remember this file?" She held up a printed contract. He hesitated. "Number my assistant, Paul Temple, usually prepared the files. I just glanced and clicked." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Where is Paul now?" "He left last month. Said he needed a break." "Or maybe distance," Maya murmured. "Mr. Grant, I think Paul forged your signature. Or worse, he was working with someone on the inside." Grant stiffened. "You're implying betrayal?" "I'm saying someone weaponized your trust." That afternoon, Maya rode the subway to Midtown. She had tracked Paul Temple's old co-working address through the corners of public records and scraps of conversation overheard in the estate's staff kitchen. The building was gray, unremarkable, a dozen names stenciled on office doors. She found his suite, Paul Temple, contract consultant. But the plaque hung crooked, the door slightly ajar. Maya pushed it open. The office was in disarray, drawers yanked out, papers scattered, a laptop missing from its charger. A faint smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. Something had spooked him, badly. She crouched, scanning the mess. Near the desk, a folder had been left behind. She opened it carefully. Inside were 3 copies of a contract draft, nearly identical to the ones in court. But the metadata footers told a different story. One listed Zurich, another New Jersey. A third had no trace at all. Maya clutched the folder, her pulse quickening. This wasn't just sloppiness, it was deliberate. She snapped photos of everything before slipping out, her heart pounding louder with every step down the hallway. The next morning, she sat at the defense table beside Grant. He didn't acknowledge her with words, but his brief nod was enough. Across the aisle, prosecutor Lauren Keene strutted in, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Good morning," Lauren said sweetly. "Ready for round 2, counselor?" Maya stood, voice calm. "More than you know." As proceedings began, she laid out the metadata discrepancies. "Your Honor," she explained, "these contracts originated in 2 different locations, Zurich and New Jersey. The phrasing in question matches European legal dialect, not U.S. standards. It suggests a ghost draft inserted offshore." The gallery leaned forward. The judge scribbled notes. Lauren objected, her tone sharp. But Maya countered with a printed chain of custody from a digital forensics firm. "This file came directly from Paul Temple's hard drive. He disappeared yesterday morning." The courtroom fell silent. The judge leaned back. "This is no longer a simple fraud case. We may be looking at evidence tampering and conspiracy." Grant turned his head slowly, staring at Maya with something new in his eyes. Not scorn, but recognition. Late that evening, back in her basement apartment, Maya sorted through papers again. Her eyes burned, but she refused to stop. Every clause, every date, every signature. She mapped it like a detective tracing footprints in the snow. Then beneath her foot, she felt something crinkle. She stooped and picked up a torn envelope. Embossed on the corner was a name that froze her blood, Alter Holdings. Inside was a stained memo dated 6 months before the lawsuit. It referenced strategic legal pressure to force renegotiations with Grant's company. The language was chillingly precise. If resistance occurs, pursue hostile acquisition through litigation pretext. Her fingers trembled. This wasn't just opportunistic fraud, it was premeditated. Maya called an old classmate from Columbia, Reggie Holmes, now a journalist at a scrappy Queens paper. They met at a diner, sliding into a booth with greasy fries between them. She handed him the memo. Reggie whistled low. "Martin Lyles," he said, pointing to the signature. "General counsel at Alter. He's been linked to offshore firms that specialize in pressure contracts. Whistleblowers in his past cases? 2 ended up dead. 1 ruled an accident, no autopsy." Maya's stomach churned. So they manufacture legal tension. They build lawsuits like weapons. Reggie nodded grimly. "That's the idea." Maya leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above. "Then they picked the wrong maid to mess with." The next day in court, Lauren Keene tried to dismiss the metadata as questionable. Maya rose smoothly, objecting with newfound confidence. "Your Honor, my presence may be unconventional, but in 2 days I've uncovered more truth than their entire firm in 2 months." The judge's gavel struck. "Objection overruled." Gasps rippled through the gallery. That afternoon, Maya returned to the estate. She scoured Paul's old office and found a black planner tucked in the back of a drawer. Most pages were mundane, but one sticky note made her breath hitch. Zurich packet, 2913. She didn't know if it was a code, a locker, or a courier file, but it was a trail. The following morning, she traced the code to a private storage service in Jersey City. The clerk eyed her suspiciously, but finally handed over a small key. Inside locker 2913 was a slim manila envelope sealed with red wax, the letter L pressed into the center. Maya slipped it into her coat and hurried home, nerves crawling across her skin. When she broke the seal, a USB drive tumbled out along with another memo. This one marked confidential, internal counsel only. Her stomach flipped as she read. Martin Lyles himself had outlined tactics for achieving a hostile acquisition. VPN rerouting, forged signature trails, offshore shell companies. One spreadsheet even projected $23.4 million in profit from litigation leverage. They had budgeted for the lawsuit. Her hands shook. This wasn't just about Grant. This was systemic. Later that evening, she delivered the memo to Grant. His face drained of color as he read. "They planned this months before I signed anything," he whispered. "They were going to steal my company with or without me." "We need to present it," Maya urged. But before they could act, the shadows moved closer. On her way home, a black car pulled up. The tinted window rolled down to reveal a man in a tailored suit. His pale eyes fixed on her. "Miss Ellis," he said smoothly, "you've made your point. Walk away and no one gets hurt." Maya clutched her folder tighter. "Tell your people," she said, voice steady. "The only way I walk away is through the courthouse doors, with the truth." The car pulled away. The city lights blurred, but Maya kept walking. Her knees trembled, but her resolve was iron. That night, she reinforced her apartment locks, copied files onto hidden drives, and scribbled a timeline across her wall. Names, dates, arrows connecting betrayals, a conspiracy web, and she stood at the center. The fear hadn't left. But fear was no longer the master, it was the fuel. She looked at the folder glowing under the lamp and whispered, "I'm not backing down." And for the first time, Alexander Grant's survival, and perhaps justice itself, rested in the hands of the maid no one had ever noticed. The night after the black car incident, Maya hardly slept. Every creak in the pipes, every gust of wind against the windows felt like a warning. She kept her binder on the nightstand, her hand resting on it like a shield. By dawn, she knew one thing for certain. The threats meant she was close, too close for them to stay quiet much longer. The following day, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras clicking like restless insects. The gallery, once filled with mockery, now bristled with curiosity. No one was laughing anymore. Maya walked in wearing a plain navy dress, her binder clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't look like a lawyer, but she didn't need to. She had already proven she was something more dangerous, unshakable. Beside her, Alexander Grant rose from his seat. He had shaved, his suit pressed, his posture straighter than it had been in weeks. When Maya placed her binder on the defense table, he whispered, "They're calling this the case of the cleaning lady. CNN ran it last night." She didn't flinch. "Let them. That's the story they understand. They don't know what it means to prepare case law in a laundry room." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're going to win this." "We're going to win," she corrected. The bailiff called for silence as Judge Whitaker entered. His gavel struck once. "Court is now in session. Today we will review the defense's motion to dismiss, supported by new evidence of fraud, tampering, and unethical conduct." The air thickened. Lauren Keene, once so composed, shifted uneasily at her table. Flanking her were two men in dark suits, insurance lawyers, Maya guessed, called in as reinforcements. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice steady, "we present Exhibit C." She handed the bailiff a stack of documents. Internal emails between Paul Temple and Martin Lyles, coupled with financial records of a transfer to a Swiss account under Mr. Lyles's control. These demonstrate that the lawsuit filed by Alter Holdings was not only unfounded, but deliberately manufactured to destroy Mr. Grant's company. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the pages. "Miss Keene, do you have a response?" Lauren rose quickly, too quickly. "Your Honor, these documents are circumstantial. They could have been fabricated after the fact. There's no proof they are authentic." Maya stepped forward. "We anticipated that claim. That is why they were independently verified by a digital forensics team. Their sworn affidavit is included." The judge read silently for several long moments. The gallery leaned in, hanging on every flick of his page. Finally, he said, "Very well. This court acknowledges the documents as admissible evidence." Maya exhaled slowly. One battle won. Many more ahead. But Maya wasn't finished. She turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we also request protection for a new witness prepared to testify under oath about Alter's internal directives." The room erupted in whispers. Lauren's face drained of color. "Who is this witness?" the judge asked. "Her name is withheld for security reasons," Maya replied, "but she was present when Mr. Lyles instructed his team to falsify metadata and fabricate clauses. She can testify that the goal was not justice, but the ruin of Mr. Grant's name." The judge leaned back, clearly shaken. "If this witness is credible, these allegations escalate beyond civil misconduct into criminal conspiracy. Court will recess until she can be prepared for examination." Reporters bolted from the room, eager to feed the frenzy outside. Alexander leaned toward Maya. "You just cracked their mask." Maya didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the judge's bench. "No," she whispered. "I tore it off." That afternoon, Maya met the whistleblower in a quiet cafe in Queens. She was barely more than a girl, Elise Romero, 23, pale, trembling, clutching her messenger bag like a lifeline. "You don't have to do this," Maya told her softly. "I do," Elise whispered. "I was there. I heard Lyles say it. He didn't care about winning. He wanted to ruin Mr. Grant so no one else would challenge them. I altered metadata myself. I destroyed records. I stayed quiet too long." Maya reached across the table, resting her hand on Elise's. "Then you're braver than most. We'll make sure your voice is heard." For the first time that day, Elise's shoulders relaxed. That night, when Maya returned to her Newark apartment, her stomach dropped. The lamp on her desk was knocked over. Papers scattered. Someone had been inside. She didn't enter. Instead, she backed out into the hallway and called Reggie. "They didn't steal anything," she told him when he arrived minutes later. "They just wanted me to know." Reggie's jaw clenched. "You need to stay somewhere safe. My cousin's place in Hoboken. It's quiet. Retirees mostly. You'll be invisible." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." That night, in a small one-bedroom filled with porcelain cat figurines, she spread her files across the borrowed couch. Fear should have crushed her, but instead clarity filled the space where fear used to be. She was done hiding. Just before midnight, she called Alexander. "I want to go public," she said. He was silent for a long moment. "You're already public." "No," she replied. "I mean a press conference. Full transparency. Show the documents. Make it impossible for them to bury this. You'll make yourself a target, he warned. I already am, she said simply. The next morning outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Maya stood at a podium. Her voice rang steady over the chaos. I was not hired to fight this case. I was not trained to stand in a courtroom, but I have stood for the truth, and I will keep standing, because power built on lies deserves to fall. Behind her, Alexander stood silent, his expression unreadable. Somewhere in the crowd, a reporter whispered, "She's not just defending him. She's defending all of us." Days later, silence fell from Alter Holdings. No public statement, no rebuttal, nothing. It was worse than threats. It was the quiet before a storm. Then news broke. Martin Lyles had vanished. Lauren Keene filed a motion to withdraw, citing conflict of interest. Elise called Maya in tears. They went after my father. Someone smashed the window of his dry cleaning shop. They left a note. Stay quiet. Maya clenched her fists. We're almost there. Hold on. By Friday, the judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing. The courtroom overflowed. Reporters lined the walls, microphones whispered into cameras. Alter's board members appeared, their polished faces masks of fear and denial. Maya stood at the defense table, binder in hand, Elise trembling beside her. Your Honor, Maya began, we submit Exhibit D, an email chain between Mr. Lyles and multiple Alter executives. It outlines a plan to destabilize Grant Holdings, force renegotiation, and fabricate legal grounds for acquisition. The authenticity has been confirmed by 3 forensic analysts. The judge scanned the projection of the emails. Phrases glared across the screen. Walker won't see it coming. Paul handles the signature trail. The gallery gasped audibly. Do you deny these emails, counsel? The judge asked the stiff-faced replacement attorney. He cleared his throat. Not at this time, Your Honor. Then came Elise's trembling voice. I was there. I altered the timestamps. I followed Martin Lyles' orders. But I can't stay silent anymore. The judge nodded solemnly. Your testimony is noted. For the next hour, the evidence poured in. Financial transfers to Zurich. Video footage of Lyles entering a private bank. Testimonies from junior staff. The noose tightened around Alter Holdings. Finally, the judge's voice cut through the silence. Given the weight of the evidence, the credibility of the witnesses, and the plaintiff's failure to contest meaningfully, I am dismissing the case in full. Furthermore, these materials are referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential federal prosecution. The gavel struck. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence was heavier than sound, reverent, like the moment after a storm breaks. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Maya stood on the steps, the world watching. When asked for comment, she said simply, truth is slow, but it never stops walking. Beside her, Alexander Grant finally spoke. His voice carried not arrogance, but humility. This woman didn't just defend me. She defended every working person who has ever been stepped on and told to be grateful for it. That night in Hoboken, Maya sat alone with her binder. It was over, or so the world thought. But she knew the truth. Battles may end, but wars for justice never really do. She stared at the mural painted across from her borrowed apartment window. A woman in an apron, arms folded, standing tall. Beneath it were the words, she didn't ask for permission. Maya smiled faintly. The system had tried to silence her. Instead, she had become its loudest voice, and the world had listened. The echoes of the gavel still lingered in Maya's ears as she stepped away from the courthouse steps that evening. The city around her buzzed with headlines, flashing cameras, and hurried voices. Yet within her chest there was only stillness, a deep, heavy silence that felt almost sacred. She had stood in the place where she was never meant to stand, and she had won. Alexander Grant sat across from her later that week in a quiet restaurant near Battery Park. The man who had once barked at her to return to polishing silverware now looked older, softer, humbled. His suit was tailored as always, but his eyes no longer carried the sharp gleam of untouchable arrogance. I keep expecting it to fall apart, he admitted over a bowl of clam chowder. Like someone's going to walk in and tell me it was all a dream. Maya stirred her tea. It wasn't a dream. Dreams don't leave bruises like this. He studied her, then exhaled. You've done more for me in weeks than my entire legal team did in a year. You didn't just save my company. You saved me from myself. I almost became blind to everything but numbers and pride. Maya met his gaze steadily. You were never the villain, Mr. Grant, but you were blind, and the system counted on that. For the first time in their relationship, silence between them wasn't hostile. It was understanding. 2 days later, Maya visited Elise's father's dry cleaning shop in Flatbush. The broken window had been replaced, and taped to the glass was a handwritten sign. Thank you, Maya. Inside, Elise's father folded a pressed shirt with careful hands. You must be her, he said, his Brooklyn accent thick. My daughter told me you were tougher than steel, but kind as bread. Maya smiled faintly. That's high praise. He motioned for her to sit. When Elise was little, she'd sneak into the back and say she was training to be a hero. I laughed because I thought the world didn't give girls like her capes. But then you walked into that courtroom, and you made the whole world listen. The words settled over Maya like a weight she wasn't sure she deserved, but she accepted them because they weren't about her alone. They were about everyone who had been silenced. Weeks passed. The media frenzy dulled, though Maya's name lingered in op-eds and college lectures. Alter Holdings collapsed under federal investigation, its executives scrambling to protect themselves. But Maya was already looking forward. She spent nights drafting ideas at her small kitchen table, the same one covered in sticky notes during her fight. Only now the folder before her bore a new label. The People's Law Project. Her vision was simple yet radical, a foundation that offered free legal guidance to workers, janitors, housekeepers, whistleblowers, those like her who were always told to keep quiet. Alexander Grant offered her a position as a consultant for his restructured company. She declined a salary. Instead, she requested funding for her project. To his surprise and perhaps his relief, he agreed. 1 year later, the courtroom was smaller. No flashing cameras, no marble grandeur. Just folding chairs, workers in plain clothes, and a modest lectern bearing a plaque. The People's Law Project, free legal access for every worker. Maya stood at the front, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Her voice carried not with the sharpness of battle, but with the warmth of purpose. Most of you know my story, she began, and if you don't, you've probably heard someone else tell it louder than I ever intended it to be told. I never planned to be a lawyer. I planned to survive. But something happened. I saw something wrong, and I spoke, and then everything changed. She paused, letting the words settle. Justice doesn't begin in marble halls. It begins in kitchens, in mailrooms, in janitor closets. It begins when someone dares to say, this isn't right, even when no one is listening. The crowd, mechanics, bus drivers, baristas, home health aides, nodded quietly. They understood. At the back of the room, Alexander stood in silence, his presence quieter than before. He wasn't the center anymore, and for once he didn't mind. That night, back at her apartment, Maya sat alone with her binder. This time, it wasn't a weapon, but a seed. Inside were names of volunteers, notes on community needs, translations of court forms. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed. Maya had begun not just to defend one millionaire, but to defend the voiceless. And this time, she wasn't standing alone. The room emptied slowly after the gathering at the People's Law Project. Volunteers stacked chairs, a janitor locked the side door, and the hum of conversation drifted into the Harlem evening. Maya remained by the lectern a moment longer, her fingertips brushing the modest plaque, as if to remind herself it was real. When she finally stepped outside, the autumn air carried the faint scent of roasted peanuts from a street cart. Elise joined her on the sidewalk, smiling shyly. Can you believe it's only been a year? Maya exhaled, a soft smile curving her lips. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. They walked together toward the subway, their coats pulled tight against the chill. Ordinary, unremarkable, yet powerful because they were no longer walking in silence. Back home, Maya placed her old binder on the kitchen table. It no longer represented a single trial or a desperate fight. Now it was a foundation, a blueprint for voices that refused to be buried. She whispered into the stillness, almost like a prayer. Justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins here, and it never stops. Her phone buzzed with another message, someone asking for help, someone who had seen her story and realized they were not alone. Maya smiled faintly. The fight would continue, but she was ready. Because justice, she knew, was not a moment. It was a movement. And movements grow when one voice dares to speak and others dare to follow. And as you hear her story, ask yourself, if the moment came, would you be the one to speak? If this inspired you, subscribe and share your thoughts below, because voices grow stronger together.